So my dad calls me and goes, "Hey, I found your childhood typewriter in the attic." And I'm like, "Cool, toss it. Zero nostalgia. I don't miss the era where writing involved physically wrestling a sheet of paper." Then he says he found a prototyping board up there that definitely wasn't mine. I pause for about 30 seconds, just long enough to picture myself pretending I'm that kind of person who uses prototyping boards. And I'm like, "Yeah, toss that too. Or sell it. I'm not that nerdy." Then he says, "I found your childhood Panasonic TV," and I immediately turn into a different person. Full reboot. Suddenly I'm sprinting toward the door. I'm like, "I want that." And I drive over as if the TV has been trapped up there, sending out a tiny distress signal. It's a Panasonic TR-233, manufactured in Osaka, Japan in November 1976. It was a Christmas present my dad bought for me, and we picked it up at a Kmart just a few days before Christmas. Back when buying electronics meant fluorescent lighting, a cart that wobbles, the quiet thrill of will this absolutely last forever. I love the bubble holes over the speaker and the simulated wood grain sides because in the 70s, everything had to look like it could also be a coffee table. Over the years, this TV lost most of its knobs except the power/volume knob, the only knob that really matters if your plan is turn it on and hope. For the missing knobs, I grabbed needle nose pliers from my tools. You know, you're not doing vintage preservation if you're not gripping a control shaft with metal pinchers and pretending that this is normal. The TV is filthy, so I hit it with some Windex and I clean the glass first. The front is dusty, but it's kind of like that dust that says, "I've been resting," not "I've been destroyed." The secret combo of 91% isopropyl alcohol and a magic eraser are going to solve the real drama. You see, white latex paint overspray is speckled all over the sides and top of the TV. I guess this means that somebody, probably me, used a paint sprayer in the past and never noticed that the TV was taking on latex shrapnel. Oops. The magic eraser is basically a tiny, laws of nature abiding sanding pad. Will that plastic wood grain survive this process? Well, so far so good. In between the magical erasing, I also clean off the plastic with a round of Windex to take the edge off. And that's a thing, I'm pretty sure. Thanks to high-speed video, we blast through cleaning the remaining sides, nooks, and tiny hiding spots where dust goes to retire. One last inspection, and I'm declaring the outside done, which means it's time to test the inside. And yes, it's probably also dirty because this TV has been living the attic lifestyle since the Carter administration. We plug it into an extension cord, take a respectful step backwards, and hope for the best. I don't know where the nearest fire extinguisher is, but I do know the garden hose is about 5 feet away. So if anything happens, my emergency plan is utilize the outdoor plumbing and, again, hope for the best. A sort of picture starts to appear slowly, like the TV is waking up and trying to remember what televisions are supposed to do. But it's very gray because the brightness and contrast controls have not been adjusted in so long, they've basically fossilized. I start turning the plastic knob, well, the former knob's plastic shaft? Yeah, we're gonna go with that. I turn the shaft and I can literally feel the mechanism inside saying, hey, please don't do that. Is there a more technical word for those little plastic shafts? Because I think the name shaft is already taken. Okay. Since nothing caught fire, I decide we should open the case and let's see what's inside. And by open, I mean I'm going to go grab a screwdriver and slowly discover all the screws like we're on a tiny scavenger hunt. And the prize is more things to fix. 2 screws on the base, easy. 2 screws on the side, fine. And then 1 on the top right by the handle because somebody in Japan probably sat down, did the math and said 5 screws, perfect. No notes. Then I discover there are secret screws holding the antenna connections hostage to the other half of the case, because of course there are. We're not just taking a TV apart, we're negotiating a release. Once we remove those, we're finally allowed to lift the back off and take a look inside. And what do we see? From left to right, a little power board, then the VHF tuner behind it, then the UHF tuner, a cluster of picture adjustment knobs, and a generous mixture of dust and mystery fibers. that have been quietly collecting since probably the 80s. The flyback transformer is over on the right, looking very important. Pan up, and then there's the picture tube with a cute little neck board on the end, like it's wearing a tiny hat. Okay, let's back up and appreciate the full interior. It's compact, it's busy, and it absolutely does not want to be touched. Back toward the rear are the knobs, technically potentiometers. The black one is power and volume together, and the others handle brightness and contrast. We're going to break out some deoxit contact cleaner and try to convince these controls to start participating in life again. So we give the potentiometers a generous dose of deoxit, and then we power on the TV so we can work that cleaner in by turning those plastic shafts again. You twist, you wiggle, you rotate it back and forth like you're trying to unlock a safe. The goal is to get the deoxit into places where electrons are supposed to be friends. These knobs have been sitting idle for decades. If they want a little lubrication attention, fine, they've earned it. Next, we break out an infrared camera to see if any components are quietly planning something dramatic. It's a great tool because it lets you spot what's running hot without putting your face next to it and learning a life lesson. Some things are expected to warm up, especially those chunky ceramic components that look like they were designed for protecting the space shuttle. We'll take warm and working over warm, but thinking about learning how to smoke any day. I do have to rotate the footage here because I was holding the camera upside down because I enjoy making simple tasks harder. But once we scan around the TV after it's been on for a bit, we can see certain parts heating up, resistors doing their job, power components being power components. Nothing looks abnormal, which is great. I still don't want to run it too long in this state because all that dust and mystery fiber needs to be dealt with before it gets any ideas. Satisfied that nothing is about to immediately betray us, we move on to the next phase, pulling this main PCB out, or at least moving it as far away from the tuners as possible, and giving it a proper outdoor bath. Now, first thing we do is remove the anode cup by discharging any voltage that might still be hiding in there. We've discharged hundreds of monitors at this point, and there's always someone out there who's convinced you're doing it wrong, despite the fact that they are in fact wrong. I welcome those contrarians. Come forth, critique my technique, challenge my TV discharge abilities. I will be accepting applications for the position of guy in the comments who insists on a different screwdriver. Next, we start unplugging a truly unnecessary number of wires. There's one going to the tuners, there's one going to the potentiometers, there's one to the yoke, there's one to the neckboard, and several that go to places that are best described as somewhere important. There's also one wire that traditionally doesn't get removed, the DAG wire, which is basically a ground wire meant to keep the tube properly grounded. Keeping it simple, it keeps the electricity where it's supposed to be. We cut it in half for now with scissors because sometimes you have to commit. Then we'll add quick connects later so we can reunite the two halves like responsible adults. After some last second fidgeting, we carry the monitor and its display board out to the deck and absolutely soak it in simple green. We let it sit for a bit so the grime can reflect on its life choices. Then we switch to the shower setting on the hose and rinse it down. Yes! We are using water on electronics. Is that ideal? No. Is it acceptable if you only do it once every 40 years and you let it dry thoroughly? Yes. Ideally, you'd use distilled water, but we don't have any, and the hose is like right there, and I am not walking back inside. Once everything's rinsed, we point a high-powered fan at it and let it dry for a full day. And for some reason, the first thing I decide to do afterward is reattach the anode cup to the picture tube, because apparently I like starting with the part that looks the most dramatic. The cup has become rock hard over time, so I use a heater to soften it up, giving it a chance to cooperate and not tear itself apart during installation. We're trying to avoid rough housing with a 1976 CRT. It has seniority. Next, we crimp the Quick Connect spade terminals onto the DAG wires we cut earlier, and we add little clear insulating boots to keep them from touching anything they shouldn't. Then we reattach the neckboard to the neck of the picture tube, hence the name neckboard. A rare moment of honesty in electronics terminology. I've also got a coax to 300 ohm connector I want to install right now because 1, it looks cool, and 2, if I set it down for even 5 seconds, it's going to disappear into the same dimension where every small screw I've ever lost has gone. So it's happening now. This is called a balun, which I now know thanks to the approximately 300 comments on our Vendovision video that all started with, actually, it's a balun. So this one is a 75 to 300 ohm version, and I like it way more than the little square balun that does the opposite conversion. This one looks like it's trying to be taken seriously. Now that we're done dressing things up, I want to replace a couple capacitors just to get my feet wet. Not literally, not near the electronics, you know what I mean? The first capacitor we're swapping in is the filter cap. It's the big one. It smooths the power going into the set. It's usually the largest capacitor on the board, and ours is a 220 microfarad 160 volt unit. And I just happen to have a brand new replacement because of course I do. It's basically been waiting for its big moment in a tiny little capacitor waiting room. The Hakko desoldering gun makes another appearance, and I love this tool because I am not good at the traditional method, which is using a manual solder sucker vacuum. Yes, that's its real name, solder sucker. Completely accurate branding, no notes. In no time, we free the filter cap from its decades-long assignment. And yes, realizing how old that capacitor is also means realizing how old I am, which is a fun bonus feature of vintage electronics. Anyway, yeah, new capacitor goes in, and I solder it in from a weird angle because that's the angle that the universe provided. If I wasn't filming, I'd reposition everything for convenience, but since I am filming, I'm soldering from the side like I'm diffusing a bomb, but that's okay, it's fine. It's only risky if hot solder decides to land on your hand, and I'm not interested in adding anything to that episode. Next, I spot a very large 1000 microfarad 25 volt capacitor over on the vertical circuitry side. We do the same routine, desolder, remove, replace with a fresh modern capacitor. Eventually, I'm going to make a full list of every capacitor on this board so that we can do a complete swap, and maybe even do it to the Vendovision monitor as well. But for now, we're giving the 2 biggest ones the deluxe treatment, large caps first. That's the policy. I power the monitor on just to make sure I did not install anything backwards because that's always a fun way to learn humility. I take a few looks at the picture and you can tell that I like what I see, which means we've officially earned the right to move on to the final phase of this mini restoration. That's right, it's the let's play a game on this ancient TV phase. My first console was an Odyssey 2, but today we're going with something I conveniently have on hand, a Nintendo Entertainment System. So we hook up the usual chain of adapters, RCA into a modulator, modulator into coax, coax into channel 4, because channel 4 is my favorite setting in life. The only catch is the channel knob is missing, and the knob is the thing that tells you what channel you're on. So now I'm tuning by instinct. Are we on channel 4? Are we on channel 7? Are we receiving a distant weather station? Who's to say? And then boom, we get it. Yes. The picture is still a little wavy, but the contrast looks fantastic. The wave pattern is basically the TV whispering, hey bro, replace the rest of the capacitors. And yes, we're gonna do that. I also reach over and I adjust the horizontal hold so the words Double Dragon are centered, because right now it was drifting towards Double Drago, and I can't let that stand. That's not a title, that's a typo. So, shall we play a game? You know, I feel like I should be telling you about the history of Double Dragon right about now. Like we're in a documentary and I'm the narrator who's also holding an NES controller and making poor decisions in real time. So yes, Double Dragon is a 1987 beat-em-up developed by Technos Japan and published by Taito for arcades. It's basically the spiritual and technical follow-up to Techno's earlier beat-em-up, Kunio-kun, which came out in 1986 and was released outside Japan as Renegade. The creators originally wanted Double Dragon to be a direct sequel in that universe, and then at some point they were like, you know, what if we just made a new game with a new cast and a new setting, which is the most honest sentence ever written in game development. Anyway, none of this changes the fact that I'm not very good at it. I'm doing my best, but the game is doing what it does, which is asking you to fight everyone forever. Also, the rolling you're seeing on camera isn't on the TV in real life. That's just the camera and the TV refresh rate having a fight. Now that we've zoomed out a bit, you can see the television is fine, the camera was confused. You know, I knew we could get this TV working again, and I appreciate your hanging out with us while we took things apart and put them back together again. You know, you must really like that stuff. And if you really like it, then please drop us a like. A like is like a pat on the back for us. And subscribing is like a really nice handshake and maybe a fist bump. But you know what happens if you hit that notification bell? That's like a full-on bro hug. You'll also know when our next video drops, so bonus. Thanks again for helping me revive my childhood black and white Panasonic TV. Totally worth it.